What if we could cheat death, or at least extend our lives? Science is now exploring new ways to slow down and even reverse the process of aging. But what would the world look like if that happens? I'm Nader Nehdi, and this is the Doha Debates podcast.
Yeah, it's rolling, I'm ready.
3, 2, 1.
Is it natural to die? Yes, but polio was natural too. What did we do about polio? We got rid of it.
Humans are, by definition, immortal. What is immortal is what decays.
Sad fact is that many old people are not wise at all. They're just as stupid as many young people.
If we have the resources to research, then why are we not researching how to make existing lifespan healthier?
Today's debate is aging something to be embraced or a disease to be cured? I'd like to welcome our guests. To my right, Dr. Natasha Vita-More, innovator and health span and memory preservation. Dr. Alaa Murabit, a physician and global health advocate. And to my left, Michael Hauskeller is a professor of philosophy at the University of Liverpool, and Dr. Thalia Arawi is a bioethicist and the co-founder of Theory to Practice. It's such a privilege to have you guys here on the table. Thank you so much for being here. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm just going to explain how this debate is going to be slightly different. What's so special about this table is all of you have very differing opinions, and at times you'll probably be at odds with one another. But what makes Doha debates so unique is the tone of the conversation will be had with respect, familiarity, in hopes that you'll find some sort of common ground. But if you don't, that's totally cool also. But hopefully, at the very least, we'll learn something from each other today. Now to the question, is aging a natural stage of life to be honored or a biological flaw that humanity should overcome? Thalia, I want to pass that to you.
I've been surrounded by people who aged, okay? And ever since I was a child, not necessarily a child, but I recall when I was maybe 18 or something, and I bought Simone de Beauvoir's book, La Vieillesse. It's a 2-volume thing. I still see it on the bookshelf, but I never dared reading it. I dreaded old age, not for me. I dreaded old age for my loved ones, because old age was equated in my pre-conscious or even conscious with death. So eventually I learned to embrace old age as something beautiful, actually. And we are lucky if we reach that age, other things considered. So I don't see it as a disease.
That's fascinating. Is there a counter argument to this? And I want to send this to you, Natasha.
Oh, yes.
Let me know what you think about it.
I think it's really important to understand what aging means. And it means something via each field. For example, in medicine, the pathology of aging is a cellular breakdown, destruction of cells, which affects our organs, which affects our entire bodily system. And this is entropy. It's breaking down, causing diseases, cancer, dementia is on the rise, certainly. But it's a cellular breakdown. And that is something that I think needs to be cured. I think it's our number one issue that we have as humans. I think all life is seen as something precious, and life is precious. And to allow that to happen, to me, is immoral, and especially for elderly people over 60, 70, 80, whose bodies are frail, who are suffering from muscular loss, bone density loss, dementia. If we don't work with that to help them, what's the point of being here, in my view? Now, another thing that I think is very important to understand, that aging as the passage of time with maturity, with maturation of life experiences, that's a totally different concept of aging. In that regard, aging is something to be valued, something so precious, again, like life is precious, but it's the wisdom that we gather through our experiences. So in my view, the aging meaning, the deterioration of our cellular structure that causes diseases, especially to the vulnerable, our most precious elderly parents and loved ones, and dementia on the rise, that must be dealt with. But for the passage of years or time And the wisdom that we gather, that is something to withhold and value more than anything else. It makes our stories, our fiction, our architecture, everything in humanity is based on the wisdom and the experiences that we have. So here again, I'm going to challenge. Death does not give meaning to life. It's our experiences that give meaning to life. I mean, how many of you know someone who's come back from the dead and said, death gave me meaning to life? Let me die again to give meaning to life. But no, you hear people talk about their experiences, and that gives meaning. And that's why purposefulness is so important. Excuse me, I didn't mean to go on so long, but I think it's a really important issue.
Absolutely.
The definition of aging.
Address that?
Yeah,
Please.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. But diseases, even memory losses and cognitive problems and health problems do come also to young people.
Of
so it's
course.
not just a matter of aging. So in that case...
But the cell is aging
Yes.
during that. It's diseased.
Yes. So the disease, you might say the disease, is that cellular atrophy.
Yes.
Okay.
Entropy, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or entropy.
Yeah.
But not my or you or whoever growing old. And that's what we usually consider to be aging and
I think, and I
layman-wise.
think that's an important point because there's so many different views on aging. Take anti-aging. That's a whole cosmetic field of how you look. And there's a lot of disdain towards that because it's gotten so much popularity and it's a big industry to look younger.
Yeah.
But I think it's the psychology and philosophy of aging is really important to bring into this. So let's pass it on. But I do want to return to this because if we don't understand the definitions of aging and from our different fields and perspectives, we're not going to have that type of debate that we need to argue points effectively.
Perfect.
And,
I think
and
you
the
laid-
second point, sorry
Please,
for
no,
that,
go
is
ahead,
death.
Thalia, absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
Death was my nightmare ever since I was 10 years old. Okay, I would always look at my loved ones, go to a plant. We had a plant in the balcony, and this is very personal, but I'm saying it. And I used to hide my face and start crying because I was afraid of that day when I'm going to lose them. So I was haunted by the idea of death and separation. But I made peace with death. And now when I look at the technological advancement with robotics, with everything that's happening, and the lack of human life, I say, thank God I'm going to die, you see. But that presupposes that I have a belief that there's something after death, which is mainly my meeting again and being again with those I love and lost.
Beautiful, Thalia. And thank you.
Yes.
Both of you have laid the foundation for this debate really eloquently. On one side, we have, from what I understand, an appreciation of death and everything it brings, but also understanding aging as a set of biomechanic processes that can be prolonged, etc. Reduction.
No, that's true. And I think you articulated it far better than I did in my
Not at
lengthy
all.
dissertation here. But no, I see aging as having twofold meaning for this debate. One is the aging, the biological breakdown, the entropy of our cellular structure, which causes disease at any age. But it's our vulnerable that I'm really concerned about, the elderly people, since I'm going in that direction.
Absolutely.
But also the wisdom of experience in life, I think, is our most precious asset.
Yeah, and on that note, I would love to bring in Michael here because is there something we're missing? Right now we have two ends of a spectrum, but I'm sure there's a more esoteric philosophical argument here about aging, and what might that be?
First thing I'd like to point out, I mean, you said it's a natural process, or you framed the question in that way, right? Is it natural or should we do something about it? This is not mutually exclusive. Could be natural, like everything we do and everything that happens is actually natural. We might still want to do something about it, right? So when we use natural in this way, it's a kind of normative concept, or meant to be a normative concept, something that ought to be as it is, right? Yeah. But of course, Natasha is right to question that. Why just because it's the way it is doesn't mean we shouldn't change it, right? So is there anything good in aging? And again, you distinguish two different understandings of aging, and I think you're making a good point, right? One is the deterioration of the physiological processes and workings of the body, and the other is certain kind of maturation, gathering of experience, and so on. And we can say the one is bad, the other is good. But for me, it's important to see also the connection between aging and death. And we can separate the two conceptual. We can theoretically imagine that we age and continue to age without ever dying, right? And I think most people would agree that would be horrible.
Well, I think you're talking about immortality, and it's a false notion.
Exactly. If you understand aging in
scientifically
the first way you described, namely as physiological deterioration. So that would be a horrible thing. And it seems to me that paradoxically, what makes it less horrible, the aging, that deterioration, is that it ends with death. But I believe that you would think about it the other way around. Aging is so horrible because it does lead to death. So it's death itself that needs to be staved off. And that's what we're trying to do when we're trying to prevent or even reverse aging, staving death off as much as possible.
Well, I think we do that anyway on every level. Isn't that what we do with safety belts, with oxygen masks?
No, it's not quite the same thing.
Every day of our lives, we're doing everything possible to stave off death. But going back to this, I am not looking at aging as a build-up to death. I'm staying out of that conversation. I'm not someone who discusses immortality. I do not support the belief in immortality other than a spiritual belief, perhaps, or a Taoist understanding of it, a Buddhist understanding of it, a Christian understanding, any religious understanding of it, because an afterlife is an immortal life, and that's what I was brought up Episcopalian, and that's what we strive for. Do good in this life and do better in the afterlife, which is immortal life, and that's the Christian belief. And that's not part of my
The
dialogue.
point I'm trying to make is that I agree with you. If we're just talking about aging and the winding down of our bodies, right, we're getting sicker and sicker. If you see that as aging, then I don't see any reason why we shouldn't try to do something about it, as we do, right?
Yes.
We all want to grow old being healthy rather than sick.
But that applies to non-aged people as well.
Well, on that note,
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Generally.
on that
right?
note, I think what might be useful to understand is like aging in a practical sense in our lived realities. And here I want to bring in Alaa. Like, what would the world look like if we start to engineer aging away? What are the realistic, practical realities we have to deal with?
Well, so I found this conversation super rich because I really appreciate being able to separate the biological realities from the physiological and from the, from the philosophical. I think the question I continue to ask myself when it comes to global health writ large, to your point, this is not just a question about aging, is does it make more sense given finite resources, given the way that we invest in global health innovation and research and development, does it make more sense to add years to already long lives or to add life to existing years for underserved populations? That to me is the real question. And I think there's a health span versus lifespan question that is very fair.
Definitely.
Because everything you're saying, I mean, dementia's on the rise in the 30s, in the 40s. We're seeing breast cancer
Early
younger.
onset.
Yeah, we're seeing cancer younger than it's ever been. And we live in an era where we still have 5 million children every year dying under the age of 5. And so I think it's the challenge for me. There's this famous quote in Jurassic Park about, the scientists never asked if they could. They should have asked if they should, right? And so for me, it's not can we? It's not about what's possible. I think the beauty of health innovation is it has led to the eradication of disease. We have, in the past 20 years, reduced child mortality so significantly. We're at 99% decrease in polio. I mean, we've done incredible things through innovation. I would never want us to say, let's not explore the science. But I do want to ask, what does it say about our priorities that we're talking about, okay, do we take something from 85 to 120 years old? Or do we talk about making sure a newborn can survive past the age of 5? And I would underlay that with, I do think there's a really important equity question here. You mentioned seatbelts, you mentioned airbags. The amount of advocacy, none of that was trickle-down safety measures, right? The amount of advocacy that went into those tools that are age agnostic is critically important. And the fact that it was able to serve all populations.
Yes.
My challenge with a lot of the research in aging is it is very expensive. And it means that it will go to a subsection of the population, and that is the wealthier population. And it will only increase those inequities. And that's not even getting into the gender dynamic of it. I mean, women are your primary caregivers. If you suddenly have a significantly longer lifespan, you are talking about women leading into caregiving even longer. And the one area where I really want us to kind of emphasize here is we live in a time where women already live longer than men, and yet they spend a quarter more of their lives in ill health. So I don't think it's the longer your life, the healthier you may or can be. Less than 4% of our global health funding goes into researching women and women-specific diseases. And if you take out cancer, that's less than 2%. So what does it say about our priorities that we're not saying, hey, the day a woman gives birth is still the deadliest day of her life. Let's put some more research into prepartum, postpartum, antepartum. Why are we not saying, okay, you know what, children under 5 are still dying around the world. Let's put some more resources and research into that. For me, that's the real question. I am very pro, if we can research it, we should learn about it. But the question of where we then put the resources, to me, is the big question.
That's fascinating. It's almost like we haven't got normal health right. Why are we looking to extend life even further? Do you have anything to say about that?
A couple of things. What came to mind is, first, we live in a world of sick care, not health care. And I think that is that has to be addressed. And that's an extremely complex issue because that is run by governments, by communities within governments, within societies, et cetera. And the governments have control. And it becomes a human rights issue, but human rights are viewed differently via government. So when we try to look at this as a global type of ubiquitous gestalt, it's very, very, very difficult. And that's unfortunate. So it takes advocacy and movements such as you're brilliant at it, in doing that. And so that's one thing to pay attention to. The other thing is health span versus lifespan. You mentioned that. And I think that's a very important distinction. In the past, we were talking about lifespan, life extension and lifespan. I mean, I've been in this field for 40 years, so I've seen these terms grow and change based on the needs of society. And I think that's important, that there is a flexibility, immutability within the terminology. Health span is so important, and health span is at every age. That means living a healthy life, not just a long life. And as far as the quality of life, whether you live 10 years or 20 years, I'm alive today and I love life. So I want to be alive tomorrow and love life. And some people don't, and that's fine. If they want to die, that's their choice. But if I love life and I'm healthy and I'm doing everything I can to be healthy, who is to tell me I cannot continue to live my life? The maximum lifespan we know as a fact is 122.3 years. That Jean Comey, a French woman who was written up and well known for that. Now, her lifespan, now this is documented. Blue zones may tell you something different, but where's the real facts in blue zone science? We don't know. It's just a bunch of numbers that we don't know how they're generated. But blue zones do bring us back to the health span issue and the global advocacy of it and the efficacy of it and the equity of it. You don't have to pay to be in a blue zone. You can create your own blue zone. And I think if we market blue zones or longevity zones or maybe health span zones more effectively, then people learn to eat well and exercise better, to get much better purposefulness, nutrition, love, community, these elements that we know these zones do generate. And it doesn't cost money. The last comment I wanted to make is, I think it's a really important one, is the cost of it. I am so concerned about the cost. I cannot afford to go to a longevity clinic unless I'm invited to give a talk because they're so expensive. And they are. However, now I'm not an economist. Maybe, Michael, you might know this better than me as a philosopher that deals with economics to some degree. I don't understand it, but I know it works, that the prices come down. You get some product in the marketplace, there's competition, free market trade, the prices come down. And I think that's very good. Plus, here's something else. I don't want to be the canary in the cage. I don't want to be the first place holder in trying out a new experiment, a new therapy. And yes, maybe the rich will get it first, but why not let that? I mean, let's watch and see what happens. We've noticed this with stem cell therapies. We've noticed this with gene editing. We've noticed it with different drugs, hormones, hormone replacement therapy. I went on very early on. I was taking horse Now I take bioidentical estradiol. So it changes over time. And I don't know what that early estrogen, horse urine, I should say urine is probably more elegant here. Horse urine, what is the medical term for it?
No, I was going to chuckle, but then I tried to hold it in. And then I was like, okay. I'm into it, though. Keep going.
Whatever it was, Premarin, I think it was. Even the hormones for women has changed over time. I'm 75. I've been on hormone replacement therapy since I was 47. I have seen a difference in the advances. Testosterone, men, now we're able to say men have their menopause.
Andropause.
Andropause, thank you for correcting me. It's andropause. You can take hormones for that. And hormones are pretty good. They're pretty safe as long as you take, the balancing, so, the cancers and other things. But it's very important to talk about the medical aspects of it.
Yeah, I want to pick up this idea of accessibility of longevity treatments. Yeah. And Thalia, I'm going to throw this to you. What are the ethics of the accessibility of said treatments?
Again, we need to really make a difference between what do we mean by treatment. If treatment is to make sure the cellular entropy will not go off guard and do whatever it wants, that's one thing. But if we're also saying treatment to make me live 300, 400 years or be immortal, that's another thing, okay? But the first thing that comes to my mind, especially after listening to Alaa, actually, is this is a global issue now, the idea of aging, treatment, the pharma, it's a big can of worms, and your question about prices going up and down. So if we want to treat aging, if we want to assume that aging is a disease and we want to treat it, the octopus here is pharma, okay? And pharma, unfortunately, in my belief and from my work, was not built to help us. It was built to take money from us. So it gives you a pill for a headache, but it makes sure that your headache will be fine, but it's going to cause you something else to get another medication. So that's one. My other concern is this is a global issue, just like extending life or immortality or robotics or AI or what have you. But looking at matters globally, there are more pressing issues. Okay. For example, when I turn on the TV now, okay, and I just got the shivers, I see this neonate not being able to have oxygen. Okay. I see a child not having access to basic milk formula because of war. Okay. Of wars that can be stopped. Okay. And without spending that much money, actually we're spending more money on killing than on extending life.
Yes.
So there's something fundamentally wrong with the universe when this is where we are. Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, the ethical issues are plenty, and I'm not going to give a talk on ethics. We have an expert here in philosophy, but for example, I need to think of my autonomous choice of extending my life years, if possible, this is heuristically, for 300 years. This is my decision, but how does my decision affect the risks on or the welfare of others who are going to come after me, either as a population or as not having access to this? The age divide, it's not only now a digital divide, there's also an age divide, a wealth divide. So there's a draconian universe somewhere, and it needs, I think, people like us here to
figure it out.
Yeah.
Alaa, you wanted to interject.
Yeah, I agree.
No, I was just going to say, I think one thing that, and I appreciate your personal experience in this space. I haven't been in this space for 40 years. And I've really worked at the intersection of global health and advocacy and sustainable development. And so for me, I think one thing that's really important to recognize is global health really is global health for the underserved and for countries around the world. If you are not a wealthy country, you are reliant on financing and on systems and support to be able to get access to even basic vaccines, basic nutrition. So it only kind of reinforces for me that this would be really something that caters to wealthy elites who could afford it. Because I don't see us creating a vaccine alliance for longevity when we still have children dying from malnutrition and poor sanitation. So for that for me is one of the challenges. The second thing I would say is I appreciate the notion of economies of scale as populations get older, but what we have seen, and a lot of that I think is exciting, but it's a speculative future. What we have seen with aging populations is actually that they are an incredible economic strain on our populations, that especially if you don't match longer lives with healthier lives, right? And so I go back to the original question of if we have the resources to research, then why are we not researching how to make existing lifespan healthier? That to me is the real question. And then talking about how we finance those tools, those interventions, those therapeutics, those pharmaceuticals to people globally. I have no challenge if we are at the point where we say, hey, around the world, whether you're born in Bogota or Tripoli or New York, whether you're born in Bronx or Manhattan, you get the same experience, the same quality of life, then I have no challenge. Great, people should live longer. But we're not there yet. And that for me is the bigger kind of, I would say, bioethical challenge.
Yes.
And then from a very practical sense, as somebody who works in this space, I don't know how it would be possible to be a practitioner, to be a physician, to be a global health advocate and sit around a table and make the case for longer lives versus saving those that we have today. That for me is a moral challenge, I would suppose.
Mike, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Is this just another facet of modern human life, like AI and other modern inventions, that is perpetuating divides that exist today and potentially will only benefit the rich and further compound the suffering from people from lower incomes in the global south?
I think that Natasha is actually right that new innovations tend to be very expensive at the beginning, and after a while, everyone has access to it. So it's very likely if we develop something that actually stops or even reverses the aging process, that after a while, everyone will benefit from it. But of course, the more fundamental question is here, is it something we want? Is it something we need? And in order to get it, I think we have to make it a priority. So it is a question of priorities. I agree with that. And it's not a question of personal choice. I mean, it's the way you framed it earlier. You said, I want to live longer. What's wrong with that, right? I exercise, I eat. Well, what's wrong with that? Why would anyone want to prevent me from doing that? But the fact is no one wants to prevent you from doing that. It's perfectly okay, right? What we're actually discussing, or ought to be discussing, is the claim that some or most radical life extensionists make, namely that halting the aging process and finding a way to stop this is a screaming moral imperative, and that nothing is so important as that. And we should invest all our resources into that, because death is the greatest evil. And as long as we just cure this or that disease, and at the end people die anyway, as we do, right? We haven't really gained anything. So that stands as this is the most important thing. And then we have to look at priorities. We just say, really? Really? Do we need to invest into this more than anything else? And then we look at how the world is, right? Millions of children starving to death or being killed or whatever. So many people don't have a sufficient life quality. So as long as that is not the case, should we really invest all or most of our resources into figuring out what makes us age and try to do something about it? And I think we shouldn't.
One thing to quickly correct there is cost and access are not the same when it comes to global health. So the costs may be reduced, but that doesn't make them more accessible to a significant portion of the world, right? So otherwise we wouldn't have children dying from preventable diseases. We wouldn't have, childbirth still being the #1 cause of death for women in developing countries, because the cost actually, you can get a $1.70 postpartum drape that has 99% success rate, and we still cannot get it. So cost and access are two fundamentally different things in global health.
You're perfectly right. But the point I was trying to make is that access is not a problem if it's not a thing that is worth having, right? It would only be the access is a problem if it's something we need or is worth desiring and having. So we need first to decide whether having an indefinitely extended lifespan is something that is worth having. And if not, then we don't have to worry about access, right?
So is it fair to say that what we choose to prioritize as a society is an extension of our outlook or priorities. If
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
If longevity is something important to me, then I've obviously attained a level of privilege that's allowed me to consider it even an option.
Yeah, but it's the idea of being forever young, trying to be forever young, that really has become an obsession in our times. I mean, people in their 20s now start using Botox and other fillers just to prevent even the signs of aging. And Natasha pointed out it's not the same, right? The signs of aging is one thing, and aging is a different thing. But it's the almost desperate attempt to try to stay young, at least in the eyes of others, right? That has become an obsession in our society, and I don't think it's a good development.
There's an irrationality to that, and there's also a mental illness to it, and I think that is a very serious problem. Anorexia is a disease, a very awful disease. Bulimia is a very awful disease. Body, dysmorphia is an awful disease. So the area, I wish we had a psychologist at the table here. Just because someone is obsessed with looking young is not related to the longevity industry, nor my field at all. And to assume that is like a low blow, that's below the belt, that's really ridiculous. I'm very serious as a scientist and a researcher, and I work in ethics as well and philosophy, and I think about these things very deeply. And I think they do need to be discussed, but they need to be discussed without painting a broad brushstroke and using cognitive bias. And just because you've read a few things about people screaming immortality, I've seen it too. And it's embarrassing. But those people that are on the fringe of any, again, religion, social movement, feminism, transgenderism, whatever the movement is that people are passionate about, there are the ones on the fringe who are probably get a lot of press because their voices are very loud. And they're very emotional, but they may not always be sound. Their passion may be there, the enthusiasm may be there, and perhaps there's a bit of logic there, some logos there. But the pathos of it is very frightening to me, and the ethos as well. I think that there needs to be a steady hand, a straightforwardness, and a practical sensibility about this that does include the saving lives versus extending life. But I don't think it has to be one or the other. I mean, we talked about children. I lost a baby in pregnancy and I almost died. I would never turn my back on someone who had a baby. You know, I cry a lot about it, but that's the way it is. My baby died, and I almost too. And I was in a country that didn't care for me. I was in a foreign country, but that's okay too. Happenstance. Stuff happens, and you deal with it. You get on with your life, and you find your purpose, and you give, and you take, and you share, and you learn. And that's what it's all about. So putting this versus black-white binary thinking is really, I think, a bad choice for all of us.
But that's unfortunately, I mean, to be very fair, that's the world we live in from a financing perspective, a resource perspective, and a government perspective.
Yes.
Public health has been a zero-sum game for a very long time.
That needs to change. But we get back to what I said earlier, and I don't know how to solve it because I don't go to Davos. I'm not a politician. I'm not a wealthy person. I'm not a royalty. I'm not part of that society that dictates the rules for the rest of the world. But I just do the best I can within my own field. Now, how can we influence governments to behave better and not have wars? Okay, how long has this been going on? We've had wars for eons and eons and eons ever since civilization started, going back to Neanderthals. And that's the way it is. But we say that's natural. But here we are talking about that it's bad. But then it's natural. So we get into this, what is natural and what's not natural? Is it natural to die? Yes. But polio was natural too. What did we do about polio? We got rid of it.
No, sorry.
Malaria.
Some
said it's natural.
Sorry, Natasha. Yes, I think that's a bit. I never said that there was any negative in the research, right? So I don't think the discussion has said that one is natural, one is inherently not, that we shouldn't. I actually think multiple people around the table have said, no, it's not about what's possible. It's clearly possible. We could do innovation. We can do the
whether
research.
We should. That's the issue.
It's not even to me whether we should. I think there's been a lot of incredible, I mean, somebody could have said, should we go to the moon? And we
Right,
would have a
exactly.
lot of innovation that we have today.
Yes.
So that's not my challenge. My challenge then is, what is the practical application of the science?
Okay.
That for me is the question we have to ask, because unfortunately, in the world we exist in today, global health is a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, in the world we exist in today, polio still exists because governments cannot fund it. They will not fund
it all boils down to government
But
here.
it's not just governments, because when we're talking particularly about health innovation, especially in wealthy countries, you are talking about the private sector. You are talking about insurance. You're talking about an entire layer of asset and resources that there could be opportunities to say, actually, this should be going to things that exist today, to creating better opportunity, dignity for lives today. That
I'm
doesn't
not sure
say
wealth has much to do with it. I look at the United States, which is not the wealthiest country in the world by any stretch, but it's a wealthy country. But look at the levels of obesity.
But that's my point exactly on
And
health
look
span
at
versus
the-
lifespan.
Look at the horrible food.
But that's my point exactly.
And you can live in the most remote areas of the world and have the best food. So it's,
But that's my point exactly.
yes.
That's my point exactly. My question is, if we have right now, if we were to invest a portion, as much as we do, in having this conversation around longevity, the research and science that's behind it, and the very vocal, I would say, and quite wealthy voices that are behind it, that are propelling more and more resource into this, if we could instead say, hey, how about the underserved communities in your own country? Hey, how
Okay,
about obesity
I
in
do
your
have
own
a- I
country?
have a
How
note on
about
that.
diabetes in your own country, cardiovascular disease? We are going to have the highest health costs at the national and
I'm
global
very aware
level
of that.
because of these things, not because of an aging population. Yes, disease has increased in aging populations. It has overwhelmingly increased in younger populations. We are talking about shorter lifespans. We are talking about the fact that men in the United States are living less years than they did only 20 years ago. I mean, I think there is a question about, it's not to me about should we. It's about what then is the practical application, right? And you earlier said something that I thought was very interesting about, I don't want to be the first. Let the wealthy be the first, right? In the same way
That's
that
true.
In the same way that war has been true for centuries, unfortunately, one thing that's been very true in global health research is it's never the wealthiest that are the first when it's testing. It is always your marginalized.
In some areas, eugenics and whatnot has taken place.
It's your marginalized. No, until today, if you look at clinical trials, if you look at the very the core biological fact, the data that we use, the vast majority.
So what is your solution to this problem?
Which problem?
The problem about the inconsistencies, the inequities, everything that you said has been the underprivileged, the countries that don't have what they need, the government's not taking care, the lack of responsibility, the lack of nurturing, the lack of care,
Lack of access.
Yes. So what is your solution to that?
So that's what I've been doing for the past 15 years, has been working to find financing and policy pathways
And have
to
you been
ensure
successful?
We have been. We've been quite successful. Do I think successful equals means that the problem is solved? No. I mean, for example, you have the Vaccine Alliance that has been able to save millions of children's lives, and yet we are still falling behind. You have the Global Fund to fight TB and malaria, and yet we're still falling behind. And so there has been an incredible amount, I would say, particularly of global cooperation when it comes to global health, but we still fall behind. The fact that only this year we're seeing a significant political discourse or investment in women's health in 2025. That is when we've started seeing a peak. 2023 was the first time significant research came out about the importance of investing in women's health.
Well,
that to me is pretty startling. So I think there's a lot of people, and I don't want to negate the work that you're doing. I think it's incredible.
No.
But I think
I'm
there's
very solid in the work that I'm doing.
I think there's
it can't
a lot
be
of
negated.
I think there's a lot of people around the world who are trying to solve different pieces of
Yes,
the puzzle.
exactly. That was the point.
I think the challenge is when one of those pieces is very expensive and it takes away resourcing, access, and opportunity.
So
from
can
the
I-
others.
taking
can I
away
interject
government
here?
money, where's that? Who's it taking it from?
I think both private sector and government, public and private.
I don't think it's taking government
Taxpayers.
sector.
Taxpayers. I will use the word of Walter, although it probably would not apply here. We're not saying, or at least at this point, I'm not saying we should halt what you are doing. Indeed, we should not halt it, I would say it. If my mother was alive, I would enroll her, for example, or if she wanted autonomy and otherwise. But let's consider spheres of justice here. Okay, while we are investing in AI, while we are investing in anti-aging, we are also authentically investing in solving these problems. So we have, it's been maybe 2 decades, people are speaking, the world is a global village. To me, the more global it is, the less united it's becoming. So let's give that and let's give this. This is how we work as one human race. And if I may touch on a few points that you mentioned, Michael spoke about forever young. Yes, it is true. And it's the media and the toxicity that the media is spreading in the minds of people. It's not only that they do Botox or what have you. And when I came here at the airport in my country, and I was looking at people, my God, they were clones. They all have the same lips, the same eyebrows, the same hairstyle. They're not them anymore. And it was fascinating. They all really look alike. And if my body becomes young, and this brings to mind Oscar Wilde's famous novel, the Portrait of Dorian Gray, what about the self that is inside? Okay, I learned with time that our self somehow remains young. Okay? The soul remains, you love life, you are active. The soul does not age. I don't think it ages. The self, which is a social construct, perhaps ages. And the society is so toxic, it managed to other aging. So when you are aged, there's an othering process taking place. Look at them. They stay home in certain countries. Even if you have Alzheimer's, don't let them know that they have Alzheimer's. Why? I mean, it's like migraine. It happened. Okay, it's not something to be ashamed of. Society is toxic, and it is othering natural processes in life. Yes, if it's a disease, we should eradicate it. But if other things are also diseases, let's consider from a spheres of justice perspective. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, and you said a very important question. You said, what are our values and our views that we want to do this? But the big question is not about values and views. It's about who is this our? Is it everyone? Is it the global north? Is it the global south? Is it both of them together? For example, now I'm working with the Genome Project 2 phase, okay? It's fascinating. The proposal is fascinating. I cannot say more about it because we're still working on it. But the divide between the haves and the have-nots and the global north and the global south when it comes to genome editing is so widespread. You can tell that the global north is a guinea pig and nothing else. We speak slogans that we're going to make it global, but it's not a human genome project. It is a global north, maybe human genome project. And the last thing I wanted to say, actually 2 things. The toxic society that I was talking about. When I was teaching to my medical students about, it was a case discussion, although I don't like cases. Vignettes do not really show the details. We had a patient who was 82 years old. She came with a femur fractured femur. And I can still see that student who said, no, I will not propose a hip replacement. Why? Khalas, she lived her age. Khalas in Arabic means it's over. No, it's not over. If you're willing to give the other things considered, of course. I'm not talking about other risks, other comorbidities, no. But when this is ageism, when you say this person can have a hip replacement because he is young and that person cannot because she is old, this is ageism. And it's part of our toxic culture, unfortunately. And as I was coming here, I bought a book from the bookstore and the airport, incidentally, by mistake. It was called Timekeeper by Mitch Albom, if you know him, Stories from Maurice. It's the story of an elderly person who has cancer, and he went to a cryonics institute and wanted to preserve his body in cryonics so that once a medication has been proven to cure his cancer, he can be revived and live for as long as he can. The thing is, there was a projection to the future. I'm not going to spoil it for you.
Could you just explain what is cryonics?
I think we have an expert, but right, it's freezing.
No, it's not freezing. It's vitrifying. It's vitrifying embryos, sperm, egg, organs. Now kidneys can be vitrified. It's in the field of cryobiology, which you reduce the temperature not to ice crystallization, but you can put a cryoprotectant in. And what she's referring to is whole body or neural brain only preservation. That is an option at end of life.
Right.
Many hospitals are now taking a look
How
at
does it specifically relate to aging in this case?
Yeah, I was coming to that. So this person sees the future. I'm not going to spoil the story. He is out of his machine, okay? But he discovers that the laws are not the same. The regulations are not the same. The ethics is not the same. Everyone he loves is not here. It's a life of emptiness, no purpose.
Such a no exit.
Exactly. A weak law.
That's the scariest thing to me.
A weak law, which is
no exit. Yeah.
Which is really horrible. And then you see other people who do not look like him because it's years later. It's exactly when I go to my university now where I was studying. I look at these students, oh my God, this is not how we looked like. They are so different in everything, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they dress. But anyway, and these people were looking at a screen, seeing his life from infancy. And when he asked, why do they have access to my memories and my life? They tell him because they don't have any. They don't have a narrative. They are immortal. They don't have a narrative.
Right.
They want to understand what emotion is, what pain is, what loss is. And they're looking at you as a test tube.
Interesting.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Science fiction. Yeah.
Yes,
Very
but
dystopian.
you know,
very
as Hume
dystopian
said,
science
anything
fiction.
you can imagine is possible.
Sounds like Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, but it's I mean, that's fascinating to me. And I'm personally very fascinated in this idea of just how much aging impacts the identity. So if we think of our normative lifespan, so much of our identity is shaped between these, let's say, 60 to 80 years that we live on this planet, hopefully. But if we were to age and this almost ruler of our age and our life extends, how does our identity shape and mold around that? Michael, do you have any thoughts on how identity is impacted by the process of aging?
I think aging is an essential part of our identity. So in a way, of course, we stay the same over the course of our life. I identify with Michael Hauskeller when he was 40 years old. In a way, it's the same person, right? But I'm also a 61-year-old man, right? And at that time, I was a 40-year-old man. And that is not just changing one's clothes or how one looks. It is really part of who we are. So in a way, we assume different identities. We assume different identities as we age. And in some ways, we have more in common with other people the same age that we are than we have with younger generations. Often if the age gulf is too large, we cease to understand each other. We can't really understand anymore what it is like to be a 20-year-old, even though we used to be a 20-year-old ourselves. But are our memories very accurate? Right? Do we perhaps just imagine that we know how it feels to be young? I think it might be an illusion to be able to to experience again this feeling or know what it is. But on the other hand, of course, a young person doesn't know at all what it is to be old, even though everyone who is young, unless they die young, will one day experience what it's going to be like to be old. But it is like assuming a different identity. And this gulf in understanding, gulf in understanding what it's like to be like that, I think that is one reason why we live in an ageist society. The young can't really imagine what the old have to deal with, right? What it's like to be in this world as an old person who's gradually losing their capacities.
The same could be said
but
with youth in the same time.
Yeah. But sorry, I just want to piggyback on that a little bit because I think that's true in the inverse as well,
exactly.
right? And I can comfortably say I'm 35, so I'm mid-age. So I get to I'll talk out of both perspectives. But I think one of the challenges is you so often hear from older generations, well, that's not how we had it, or that's not what we would have done. And you have younger generations. I mean, you had mentioned the United States earlier. For every $8 that is spent on senior citizens in the United States, $3 is spent on younger populations. That means that things like childcare are not universal and costed. That means that younger people are having less opportunity. They're the first generation that is going to make less than their parents were, right? And so I think there is a sense from younger generations, younger than my own even, of an inequity and the fact that that has been financed in a particular way in the benefit of older generations that maintain most of your political and socioeconomic power. So I think it goes both ways, and a bit of empathy across the spectrum is actually very helpful there.
This specifically fascinates me because what I imagine in this envisioned future where aging is less and less of a variable is what impact does that have on the way that we organize as societies? Let's say hypothetically, for example, people are living longer, but we also at the same time have declining birth rates. So now you have a population that's living beyond 100 and less people are being born. This has the potential to fundamentally turn our societies inside out, how we organize our spirituality around it, the ethics of that. Have any of you had any thoughts about what that imagined future might look like and its implications?
I mean, that's one of, if I may, that's one of the possible ethical problems of radical life extension, right? Let's say we managed to find a way to halt and reverse aging, and we all lived a lot longer. Then probably we would have less children, if any children at all. And then the question is, well, would that be a bad thing? What are children good for? You might say, we just need children now because we get old and die, right? So we need to replace people constantly. Once we all live forever or indefinitely long, that is no longer needed. And then the question arises, might there be something else, some importance to their being and constantly becoming new people who enter the world, perhaps with fresh ideas, new perspectives, and so on. And I tend to agree with that, or I tend to think that this is important. And now you might say, as someone who thinks we should all live a lot longer, that's not a necessary implication of that. We might still have children, and we might, yes, but most likely there will be a lot less because people might no longer feel the need to have them, or there might not be any room for them, right? Because every role in society will be occupied by the people who are already there.
Exactly.
So then the question is there value in there
but
being
that's a
new
problem,
people
politically and
not,
economically?
right?
That's a problem we already have.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are not abdicating
it's
once
so
they get to a
interesting.
particular age. But really quickly, one thing I'll add there is just to piggyback on your question, I would also love to hear your perspective on both people and planet. What does it do to our own experience as people if we have radically extended lifespans, but then also planet, because resources are finite and we already know that. And we're already facing the reality of climate change and climate insecurity in so many countries, particularly those that are most vulnerable already.
Although
so
the
those
climate
two
change is
questions-
caused by those who are not, between brackets.
Oh, gosh, let's not play a blame game, please.
Yeah. No, it's not a
Please.
blame game. No, it's
that's so unfair. So unfair.
I mean, look at China, India, Russia, the US. They are the ones who
Right. But regardless,
I did
the
this from
surface question,
yeah.
the kind of global reality of we don't have another, we don't have a planet B. So if we are talking about radically extended lifespans, both from a human perspective, what does that practically mean? But then from a resource perspective, what does that mean? That was my question.
What's interesting to me in this conversation is that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I don't think much further back than that, the fear, the excruciating fear, anger, disorientation, and angst was about overpopulation.
True. Yeah.
And those of us who were deeply working on ideas for the future creative, strategic ideas to solve the problems you speak of. Those were not forgotten. They're not new. Many of us have been working on them for a long, long time. But it's not a matter of overpopulation anymore. It's a matter of population decline. I was in Japan 10 years ago speaking at the Topos conference. I was brought there to talk about longevity because they were very worried about the population decline. And that was an anomaly at the time, but we've seen that that has been trending a bit. The birth rates reduced, as you were saying. And that causes some concern, to be sure. Many of us who wanted to have children can't. If I could have children today, I would. I would love to have a dozen. But, I was not able to. I didn't have the body for it. But putting that aside, I don't think that we should go off into science fiction with this. I think it's far more serious than that. The future has its promises and perils. There'll be dystopian and utopian, and then there'll be reality. And I think we need to stay focused on reality because we need to be strategic thinkers in this regard and look at not just only our desires and hopes and wishes, but what is really available, what is possible. And certainly there does need to be more balanced fairness. There must be. And I am a very staunch humanitarian. And I am so annoyed on a daily basis that when I see people talking on any level about anything that is supposedly altruistic, I see so many loopholes in the thinking. And it just doesn't make sense. It's all talk. And that's why I said, what is the progress you're making? Could you create a template that you can share and let other people do what you're doing to spread it, like a TED Talk type of thing, to look at it more from a marketability of what's accessible. And I'll also look at someone who is very wealthy, who's probably added to the carbon footprint. Bill Gates, who many people don't like because of Microsoft or whatever. He has given more to countries that need help than any other human being on this planet. And we may dislike him because he's a capitalist or he's into computers or he's wealthy. I don't even see that. What I see is how he gives through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I see others like that who maybe not be so public, but I know them and I see what they do. And that impresses me, again, going to Buckminster Fuller, someone who is an architect and futurist who thought about the world game plan, how to get food and supplies, nourishment, care to people who needed it. And it got shot down over and over and over again. And so it's not that this is a new idea. The idea is to look at how to get supply and demand, how to help people around the planet has been an architectural design element for a long time. It's been a problem. So why is it still not being solved? So what honestly is the barrier? I said governments, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. It's not my field. But I don't see where else the problem is. I see there's plenty of wars. So why is a war still going on? And
just really quickly,
Please.
on that. I actually completely agree with you on Bill. I highly admire him. I served as director at the Gates Foundation for 5 years. And I do wish that we had more leaders like Bill and like Melinda who put their resources behind supporting those who are under-resourced. And I mean, his focus has been on global health equity for 25 years. That includes malaria and TB and things that most governments either cannot address financially or don't want to, right?
Blind.
And so I think that work is incredibly important. And I do think we need more wealthy advocates for this work. I fully agree with you on that. I don't think we stop the ball on longevity research. I really don't. I think there's enough private sector interest and enough high net worth interest that there will continue to be research here. What I'm asking for is that the advocacy for those that are already underserved, that already have low quality of life because they can't get access to basic care, that is also part of the conversation. And then really quick, just on the population, that's true in certain countries. So fertility has declined in certain countries. There still is a question of family planning and others. So, but no, I fully agree with you on all counts.
So to go back on children, okay, this is one issue that you will face when you talk about longevity and extended lifespan. But there are other issues. Education. Already, if I look how I was educated, I used to carry a normal backpack to school. Now they have more material. and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's going, with AI, it's going to be totally different. So if I'm going to live 300 years, how am I going to cope in my society if I don't have all the education that I need to be able to survive? What about my career? What about my pension? So these are all things that we need to think about. And speaking of the notion of the self, okay, which is, I think, is extremely important, because if we're going to phrase ageism or define it as you beautifully did, sometimes the body looks like an enemy, okay, because it's betraying the soul that is inside of you. But the choices we make, for example, when we talk about living will, a dying patient writes a living will, we always make sure that we talk to that patient over the years to make sure that he did not or she did not change her mind. And why is that? Because the self at time 1 is one thing, and the self at time 2 is going to be different because of life experiences, challenges, losses, what have you. So what about the self over the 300? Maybe when I'm 300 years old, condemned to be 300 years old, and just playing the devil's advocate here, I'm going to regret making the decision of extending my extending my life years. I might regret it. Just like now I've always thought about this as an example I used to give in my classes, but now I heard it happened. Children suing parents for bringing them to life. So the world is really becoming bizarre.
Yeah, it's funny because there was a comment made about like maybe we shouldn't like be infatuated with science fiction, but at times this lived reality that I'm living feels like science fiction, and we're navigating things. I mean, the fact that we're talking about aging and preserving it is in fact a futuristic terminology.
That's good science fiction. I love Philip K. Dick. Science fiction is great, but I am not a big science fiction advocate. I don't read much. I've hardly ever read any science fiction.
Well, I am, and just to tell you the kind of power that I found in those science fiction is the ability to imagine a future that doesn't exist. And what we're doing really is like trying to discover what that perceived future might look like.
I think we can do it through the arts. I think science fiction sometimes takes a really bad turn.
Well, some may argue that science fiction is also an art.
It's an art, but when it gets into the Philip K. Dick dystopian, humans as batteries, it's a horrible, as the example that you gave, it's a beautiful story that you told. I mean, it's a horror story, but you wake up in the future and there's a world you don't recognize. There was a comedy movie made about this very I can't remember their name, but everyone was stupid. They had an IQ of like 0. I mean, that would be a horrible world to wake up into. So I feel a tremendous responsibility to work towards not making that type of world.
But maybe it's because you watched that movie. I think what I'm trying to understand is...
No, it's because no, it has nothing to do with watching the movie.
How important are those narratives in terms of getting us to actually circumvent some of these challenges with aging? Like I guess this is where intersection of art and aging comes into place. Like I grew up with movies that challenge this. Elysium, I don't know if you've watched that.
Yes.
But the idea of accessibility, the idea that we're going to have a rich upper class that are benefiting from things like aging and longevity, and a working class who are disenfranchised and alienated from all of that. So there's a power in making us imagine the pitfalls and the challenges with stuff like this, which is incredibly important for us to realize. So hopefully we can prevent us from going down that hole in the first place.
I look more pragmatically. I'm a futurist. I look at the world as a system. I look at the variables in the system and the influencers, the integers, et cetera. And then I take a look at scenarios. And when I look at strategy, I'm thinking about what type of scenario, what is the preferred future, all the futurist toolkit, backcasting wheels, that's how my brain thinks on a daily basis. So no matter what I'm doing, I am thinking about strategic alternatives to getting to the future that would be beneficial, not just for myself, but for my species. I'm a member of this species, and that's just the way it is. I'm a human.
Absolutely.
And I think that what we need more is more accepting of being human, and this is who we are, and we have a responsibility to being human. So what is that responsibility? Let me ask you.
I love that, and thank you for pushing me on that. And what it's making me now think is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but has this conversation been had under the guise of, by preserving age, we're underappreciating aging and getting older? Like, is there a tone of we've actually started to undervalue or not appreciate as much the wisdom that comes with growing older? Have I mistaken that?
No, I think you're absolutely correct, but I don't see that it has anything to do with the longevity community. I think that has been going on for a long time. used to be the elder had the voice, you know, the grandma, this whole, it's what you mentioned. Society is going through this incredible flux of meanderings and the media toxicity. The level of toxicity across the board is so high, it's almost frightening. It's almost like to preserve yourself. I mean, I practice Stoicism. I have to do my daily meditation. And being in this country, one thing that has come to mind, and I find this interesting, it ties in, the prayer that is chanted multiple times a day. It's not my religion. I don't mind. I don't care. I mean, be whatever religion or spiritual or non that you choose. I believe in freedom of choice and your right to choose. But I love that it's a reminder. And I think we need more reminders in whatever practice or field we're in about the value of being human and the beauty of life and being human. And we have evolved to this point.
Please,
yeah,
Michael,
go ahead.
please.
Sorry.
I'm surprised that you emphasize the beauty of being human and so on. I'm surprised because I'm not quite sure how that aligns with your belief in life extension or your advocacy of life extension.
I don't see a dichotomy there, or a challenge or a conflict at all.
But you might say this is part of the human condition, right? That we age
I think
and
part
die.
of the human.
So if you want to abolish it, I don't know whether.
Oh no, you're absolutely correct there. And I don't want to talk my personal religious or philosophical beliefs. I think that's inappropriate here.
I think they're actually very enriching for this conversation.
I think that, well, I'm not going to, but I think that what is important, and to pay homage to what you're saying, it's a very important point you make. Yes, to improve upon the human condition is something that we've done since our earliest days. To build fire, to build swords, arrowheads.
But this is not just improving,
language.
it's completely changing it, right? A life without death
Manipulating it.
would be very different.
I don't think so. Did I say a life without death?
No, you didn't.
No, I
but
didn't.
That's what we're talking about.
No, we're talking about
radical life
curing.
extension, aren't we?
No. You've been using a term I coined, and inappropriately, but I've let it go because that's okay. I coined radical life extension many, many years ago because I didn't want to use other terms, and I didn't like anti-aging. And I stepped back from it because it's been taken over by certain groups that I think don't represent the true nature of it, just like my philosophy has been kind of watered down, and just like if you have a religion and it gets on too much on the outskirts, and the radicalization of it or the fundamentalist aspects of it can take it to an area where it didn't originate. So,
Do you have an example of that? Like, how's it been distorted?
I think that I want to be very careful. Okay, so I'm going to skip that for the moment. But just to respond to Michael respectfully, I think that the human condition has always been to overcome its odds, its obstacles. That's why we have this incredible thing called imagination and problem solving and a desire to help someone, and it's an impulse. I see that innate quality where people just jump up to help. Some people don't. Okay, that's their innate quality. But I think the positive side of that, or the more practical optimist side of it, is that we'll do whatever it takes to get it done, or to solve a problem, or to reach beyond. And I think the myths of Icarus and et cetera, of don't jump too high or climb too far, you'll melt your wings, or all these myths of lore have kept us suppressed, that we get a little scared when we go outside the comfortable zone of what we're supposed to be. But we've seen how we've gotten beyond it so much, in any case, women and women's rights, and just everything that is going on, the good stuff, not the toxicity and the confusion in so much we won't get into. But I think that the basic human nature is to problem solve and overcome odds. And some of the odds we haven't been able to, the wars, why are we still fighting on this beautiful little planet that we have in the Milky Way? A speck, as Carl Sagan said. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about that. One of the most beautiful passages I've ever read was from Carl Sagan. Look at that speck. Here we are on it. And we're talking like this, and we're talking about why we need to help people who need it. that should be the basic get up every day, brush your teeth, help people who need it. Why is that not part of our consciousness or psyche? So I'm looking for a higher consciousness human. That's what I'm going towards. Okay.
And I want to thank you for providing that nuance. I think it's very easy to distill longevity and aging as something that's just about techno hubris and opportunities for us to arrogantly preserve life because we have the capacity to. But actually, there's an ethic there, and there's an intention to make the world better.
Yes.
So thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, that's what I'm driven by. I'm not a religious person, but I'm very philosophical.
Absolutely.
And I'm deeply entrenched in a philosophical view. And that view is a daily practice of maybe I call it stoicism or whatever, but it's a daily practice. And I don't do anything without thinking about the consequences.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I screw up every day, and I make mistakes every day, and I say things I shouldn't, and I do things, and I go to bed and I do my meditation. Think, how could I have done that better? But we all need to do that. So we need this reminder, again, going back to the periodic prayer. It doesn't have to be a prayer if you're not religious, but it needs to be something within you that reminds you of, the health zone, the mental health zone.
Absolutely. I know you shared that you didn't want to share your philosophical spiritual outlook, but I think in a weird way you kind of have, and we can read between those lines.
I think it's super helpful.
So thank you for sharing that.
I don't want to use the terminology because I'm avoiding it, because
but the essence of the soul,
the philosophy that I helped create has been
commandeered. Huh? Commandeered, or was that what you were going to say?
Commandeered? I don't know what that means.
Like
is this a medical
appropriated
term?
Appropriated.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
That's what it means.
No. Plain speech. Yes, it's been misappropriated. Something that I want Michael to read, as I wrote it last year, I wrote a document, and it's not a salvo, it's 11 point on, it's an affirmation about this philosophy, getting it straight, going through every misconception since I first wrote the manifesto in 1983, to my husband wrote the philosophy in 1989, to where it is today. And it's unfortunate, but when it became famous, people jumped on it. They'll jump on anything that academically or mainstream they think will bring them money or fame or fortune, and things get ruined. And now it's a bad word, and I'm not going to say it. Absolutely. So I'll just leave it at that.
No, but I do think it was really helpful to hear that, because I think it strikes to something that there's two pieces of what I'm thinking here. One is that, like, seeking humanity. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the research that came out recently that for the first time in decades, the decrease in religion has stagnated. And in developing countries, it's actually, in developed countries, global north countries, religiosity is actually increasing. And I do think that says something about people searching for meaning, whatever that looks like. And I do think searching for meaning and kind of humanity is part of this conversation, a really important part. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. The one thing I will say, though, is the reason I think the philosophy is also very important is because not everybody shares that philosophy that works in this space. That was the same philosophy that drove so much global health research and innovation. And now we're having conversations about is pharma complicit in the continuing cycles of sickness. Right? So I think I really appreciate that we're talking about it from a human level of this is what drives me. But I also think, us looking at kind of the 30K view and saying what drives this industry is really important as well. Because to your point, it gets misappropriated, it gets misused. And I think that's where my concern about widening gaps of inequity and distorting
exactly.
things
It's not just the rich and the poor, it's knowledge and information. And I'm an academic and a scientist. And when I see, even in something I wanted to bring up, it's even in the longevity community, the snake oil, the amount of hyperbole and exaggeration, and it's this flora that just is, it's this obfuscated conglomeration of stuff.
Absolutely.
Michael wanted to say something. Go ahead.
It's going to bring Michael in.
Sorry, I think
Do go ahead.
the reason I ask about your conception of human nature, or why you said that honoring, respecting humanity, I find it very interesting that your answer highlights the fact that it is not clear what it means to be human. And different people might have different understandings of what it means to be human. You elaborated then, right? And that made perfect sense. You said what it means to be human is actually a kind of transformative power, transforming the world, transforming ourselves, so on. This is what makes us human. So respecting that makes perfect sense in the context of life extension. But of course, there's no single fact about humans that could tell us what human nature is, unless you count everything that humans do and can be and so on as human nature. So when we say this is human nature, we highlight a certain aspect of human nature that we think is important. And that is not just a description of what we are, it is a normative conception. So it is describing one aspect and saying, this is particularly important. And we should try to be that. All definitions of human nature are like that, right? Aristotle, we are rational animals, right? Of course, we're also irrational animals, very, very much. Yeah. But what it means is, this is what you should try to be. So enhance your rationality, be a rational thing. So there's a certain call to be what we are meant to be in that. I think my point is that this is not something that can be scientifically investigated. There's a certain decision we make about who we want to be, and accordingly in what kind of world we want to live, right? And we might crystallize this idea of who we want to be and what kind of world we want to live by focusing on a particular conception of human nature, and we say, this is ours or this is mine. It's not a critique of what you said.
No. I think that each of us can look at what is human nature to us by a different perspective. I mean, I don't prefer dystopian stuff because it's not the part of human nature I want to be a part of, but I know it exists. I'm not going to deny mental illness. It doesn't exist, and there's some evil in the world, or bad actors there are on a daily basis. And I try to practice my life to stay away from things that are negative and icky and go towards things that are more
Can
pleasant.
I ask you a question on that?
Yes.
On that point and the one you said earlier on? The one thing I have to admit is that I'm discovering you. The idea I had of Natasha when I read was something, and I see another human altogether here. So my question is the following. We have been talking about the poor and the rich, the advantage and the disadvantage, the global north and the global south. Let's put this aside and think in terms of let's assume everyone is rich and everyone can have access to longevity medicine, okay, to put it very simply. Not all people are like you, okay? Not all people are humanitarian. Some are outright vicious, okay? Evil, even. Mm-hmm. So would you conceive of something similar to the Seattle God Committee, which was the committee that decided who gets to go to the dialysis machine when it was first invented, to decide among the list of those who are in line? It's like an organ transplant, but it's an age transplant in a way. Yeah. So who gets to get this drug and who does not? And what would be the criteria other than age?
Okay, with liver transplant, if you had sclerosis, for example, and then you want to transplant because you haven't been drinking for a while, and then you're taking a few sips on the side, you don't get that liver transplant. Yeah. So I think good behavior speaks a lot. I think age is almost irrelevant. It's that thing about the train, and this is a moral question. And when I was teaching ethics at the university, the train's going and it's going to hit an old person or a young child. Yeah. Who do you choose? Well, the old person may be the person who's going to discover the cure for cancer. Maybe that young child is going to grow up to be like a Hitler. You don't know. So it's. And then you get Kantianism, and you know more about this than I do. But it's circumstantial is very important, but I don't see it that way. I think that there's going to be a shift, and this is not hocus pocus. And you said something that reminded me of Ray Kurzweil. I was talking to Ray Kurzweil, is a very close friend of mine. He's probably the world's leading inventor and technologist and visionary in the space of the future. I may not agree with everything he says, but he's a very dear friend, and I love him very much. He said that we were talking about human nature, and he said human nature is not science. We can't assess it in that way. It's not something that scientists can determine how we'll adapt with AI or an AGI. And we had a long talk about that. But it all ties into this. My answer to you is, I think that there's going to be such a major change that there's going to be further abundance. And I'm not an abundance person. I'm not like Pollyanna, ooh la la, woohoo. I'm more of a Eric Drexler thinker about nanotechnology and molecular manufacturing. And we're seeing 3D printing is taking great strides. Remember, just 5 years ago, organ transplants were so rare. I mean, people were dying waiting for a heart transplant, a liver transplant, some transplant, or they die. And they were waiting for someone to die to get it. How insane is that?
But who gets to get the longevity drug?
Just a minute. The person has to die first before they get it. So it's, who's going to die? That to me is very
creepy in a way.
Yeah, sicko, creepy. Yeah, creepy is the best word. You two have good words for me. But the bottom line is that it's horrible the way it is now. There's no answer to the way it is. Buckminster Fuller tried. People have tried. There's no answer to the inequities and just the horrors that we live in. There could be solutions. I hope there's solutions. I look at what's going on in longevity as an example, as one of the fastest growing fields of not only innovation, investment, entrepreneurial behaviors, research, development, bar none. AI is close, but not as much as stem cells, genetics, chromosomes, et cetera. The list goes on and on within that space. I think there's going to be a shift, and I think there's going to be a very powerful one, and I think we'll all be surprised. I'm not talking singularity in that way, but that's a theoretical approach, and there's many theories on that. I'm talking about molecular manufacturing. A friend of mine, Martine Rothblatt, a very brilliant inventor, she came up with Sirius Radio. She created that, and she creates different things. She created a therapeutics company because one of her children had heart disease, and she wanted to find a cure. She did with her company. She is looking at developing transplant organs for people who need them by 3D printing. And a purist may say, oh no, I don't want that in. It's not human. I'll wait for someone to die. We can't be so particular. Prosthetics is here. It's going to save many lives, and it's going to help the people that need the transplants. So the way I look at it is right around the corner. Yes, it's not hopeful. It's more pragmatic. Again, I'm a strategist. I'm looking at what is coming up. How is it being funded? Where is it going to be accessible? Martine is not someone who says it's only for the rich. She gave these heart disease solutions to people around the world.
Yeah.
I just want to interject selfishly and invoke my powers of moderation.
Oh, go. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. You've inspired me this thought, actually, so thank you. But basically, what I've realized around this conversation, especially around access and human nature, is that there's an absence of God in that conversation. It's very, very human orientated. Does God have a role on this table about aging? And if he does, what implications around spirituality does aging pose? I think about my own tradition, and I can talk about it all day. I'm very comfortable with it, but I come from an Islamic tradition, and so much of my spiritual faith is shaped around this afterlife, or working towards this perceived afterlife. But now we're talking about the very real reality of an everlife. And what are the implications for me spiritually negotiating that perceived future? Is this something you guys have thought about? And if so, what are the intersections between God, spirituality, and aging?
I don't think you can, unless, well, again, it depends from what premises you operate from. So if you're an agnostic, you operate from these premises. If you're an atheist, you don't have God on the table. If you're, it depends where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think specifically, we're interrogating human nature. For me, selfishly, I've always kind of defined my human nature by my spiritual background. It's given me the ethics and background to make the decisions I make on a given basis. So when we're talking about ethical questions of who has access, I know that I'm coming from a spiritual human nature, or how my spirituality has helped me shape that understanding.
I think the answer to that question is independent of whether we believe in God or not. We could just look theoretically at whether God would make a difference if he existed in some way, right? And it seems to me that there are two issues here. One is, it's similar to the nature thing, right? Say it's natural to die, right? That's why we should do it. As a normative statement. We could replace nature with God and say God wants us to die after 100 years or so. You could ask, okay, God wants us to die, but do we want to die? That is important too, right? So there's a question about different viewpoints, I would say. And the other is an epistemological problem. So regarding our knowledge of what nature wants or what God wants, right? How do we know, right? We could just as well assume that God has a conception of humanity that is based on the power to transform ourselves, right? Perhaps God wants us to solve the riddle of our mortality and do something about it. How do we know, right? So in a way, it doesn't really help to think there's a God, because we don't know what God wants. And even if he knew what God wanted, that doesn't necessarily mean that we had to do it.
But a lot of please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Michael. I think you need to define we-ness here. So when you say we, who is we? Is it you, this self?
No, it doesn't really matter who we is. You can say I or you.
No, I'm not speaking in that term. Because if you come from a certain background, you might say that I can tell you I'm already immortal. I mean, humans are, by definition, immortal. Okay, what is mortal is what decays. It's the external. So.
Could you expand that point a bit more? Like, what do you mean by that?
What do I mean by
dualism? Huh? Dualism.
Yes, in a way, yeah.
The body is a vessel.
I strongly believe, for several reasons, and this belief is not justified. It's based on scientific evidence that I have went through, because I went into a journey of skepticism, of refusing everything, and then of reading and of examining, and then I had my personal life stances that made me believe and see that I am immortal, because as Rumi once said, I'm not this hair, I'm not the skin, I'm the soul that lives within. And he says, death is our wedding with eternity. So it's just like when you change homes. When you're a child, you live with your parents, you grow old, you leave your house, you have another house. This is a house. You see? And even if I want to talk about death, when they say total organ failure, okay, it's the soul that is fed up. She or he or whatever, or it tries to open a window, so the window is a cardiac arrest, and then you do your CPR and she's fine, and then she crashes another window, which is your kidney. Okay, we take her to kidney dialysis. Eventually, it starts hitting all organs. And the house is destroyed, and she leaves to where she came from initially, and because she's immortal.
So interestingly, we can say, Thalia, that you've conceptually accepted death.
That I'm immortal?
Reality.
Yes, of course. I embrace.
Would the rest of you agree with that?
Yeah.
Have you accepted death in your
Really quick, just quick on the God piece. I think I take your point, but I think one of my challenges there is just very practically, so many of our laws are anchored around religious understanding, either Judeo-Christian, Muslim, whatever it might be, right? And because that dictates so much of our government's actions and financing, the perception, the assumption of what God wants is actually quite important, because it shapes so much of our daily life and our social norms and values. So I still think it's actually a very important
So Dostoevsky said, if God is dead, then everything's permitted. So this can be translated to the idea that we have on the table. Yeah.
But the question is, was Nietzsche right with that? I don't think he was right about...
Who? Dostoevsky?
Sorry. That's from Nietzsche, actually, that everything...
the Übermensch. Nietzsche.
Dostoevsky also said that. But the idea that everything would be permitted if there wasn't any God... Many Christian theologians, philosophers still argue that today. but that would mean that morality
It's dependent
doesn't
on God.
really have any objective status that is independent of God's existence, or even if it doesn't have any objective existence, that it cannot mean something for us and exist in a social context without God, which is a very doubtful assumption. But I wanted to say something regarding your dualistic stance about being immortal and not being our body. It seems to me, even though I cannot prove it, and for all I know, you may be right. It seems to me that we're very much embodied creatures, so I don't see myself as a soul within a body is somehow imprisoned in that body, and one day when the body dies, I will be free and find another body or go to heaven or whatever. And it seems to me from our experience, this is us, this body, right? That's why I also earlier said that my age is part of my identity, because my old body is part of who I am. Right? It's not just me, although sometimes we experience it that way, right? You think, oh, my body is getting old. I feel like a prisoner. I'm so young inside. But that's why I said earlier, it might be an illusion, right? We just imagine that feeling old or being old might feel differently, so that we cannot really align it with the age of our body or the status of our body. But everything we do, everything we think and feel is an embodied event. So, and we need to assume that this is not so, that the body is really just a shell. And from my own personal experience, I don't see any reason to assume that. So from there, I'm led to expect that when my body dies, I will die, I will be gone.
So you're linking identity
again,
to your...
I don't know, of course, right? Nobody knows, because none of us has been dead yet.
Okay.
But it seems unlikely.
Yeah, there are 2 points I want to mention. So if I do, of course, I do identify with this body of mine. Okay, but I wonder when, and this has always been a complex issue for me, the face transplant. They take consent of someone who, the consent, if I die, I'm willing to offer my face for transplant. But I wonder if this is a decision that should be made by the person, him or herself, or by the parents, for example. Why? Because if there's something about the self and identity in this, you see? So if my child is dead and my child offered his face for transplant, and I'm mourning my child, and all of a sudden I see him walking next door because his face is on someone else. Where's identity? Okay, so who am I? Okay. The second thing is there's a neurosurgeon who did not believe in the soul, okay, at all. But his neurosurgery was such that, for example, he treated epilepsy by spitting the brains. And it was a surgery where the patient could communicate, so the anesthesia was not complete. It was, and he was fascinated by the experiments, over 700 experiments that he did, that that patient could actually talk, discuss, feel. And at another point, one of his patients who was undergoing the surgery, he had to freeze her heart. He had to make her dead for a while. And then when he brought her back to life after the surgery, she told him, I saw you. And she repeated what he said during the surgery. And then another point that he raises is that why all these near-death experiences, and much of them are humbug, as we say, only report seeing those who left, only those who left. So there's some common denominator here. So this person now is a firm believer in the soul. And Ibn Sina, an ancient Arab thinker, Ibn Sina had a beautiful thought experiment. He calls it the man suspended in space. And he says, imagine that you are suspended in space, so you don't have access to your senses, okay? You're blindfolded, you cannot hear, you're just suspended in space. do you still know yourself? Do you have consciousness of yourself? And the answer is yes. So this dualism, in a way, is much more than just a dualism. This soul or self or spirit or whatever you want to call it is a visitor in this body. It does not depend on it to exist from the above, that is. But you can counter-argue, of course.
But does that soul age?
I tend to think if it ages, it doesn't really age a lot because we are all children inside. I mean, you see, there's this spark that the soul has that is in every one of us.
Is this when we say like, oh, but time is just a construct and maybe it deepens an experience, but it doesn't necessarily age chronologically?
You are...
Is that what you're going for?
You learn a lot.
If we hypothesize for a moment that let's say hypothetically we're living 300 years, does the rate at which that soul age across those 300 years differ from if it was to live for 80 years?
Well, you need to define the soul, the self, the spirit, identity, all these terms.
This is how we know we're at a table with academics, because everything is like, please define that for me.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to.
I mean, I believe my grandmother was definitely a youthful spirit, but I don't think she wanted to come out with me on a Friday night as a 19-year-old. So as much as I believe her soul was forever youthful, etc., it did change relatively with her.
Okay, imagine now she's 300 years old.
Exactly.
How alienated will she be? And there's the issue of memory, and you're an expert on memory.
Am I?
No, I am.
Oh, you are. So yeah. So I wonder. Sorry.
Let me try to remember. I forgot.
So basically, we all have memories, and we also know that oftentimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, when we evoke memories, we need to, we do something known in French as the phenomenon of crystallization. So we add few things unconsciously, preconsciously, subconsciously. I don't know.
Alter it.
Yeah, we alter it.
Yeah.
So I wonder what happens to the memory of Thalia, okay, the feisty, crazy little girl she was, who was one who wanted to be a physicist initially. What memories will I continue to have of this Thalia when I'm 300 years of age? And absent my memories, am I still me? That's another question.
I think of dementia and people who, well, the soul could be defined as memories ultimately, right?
Exactly. We go back to the issue of definitions. That's why we can't escape the issue of definition.
Yeah, because I've experienced relatives of mine who've had dementia and you could say that there's an absence of the soul there.
Well, and that they identify, I mean, depending on where they are in the stage of that they might identify much more with that younger version than they do with the one that was only 10
we
years
never know.
past, right? So,
but there was something else that I wanted to say. Remembering. Yeah, about religion and God. Okay. Yes, I do agree that I know someone, I've known him for years, who is not an atheist, but an agnostic. Does not believe in any religion. But he is ethics embodied. So I'm not saying that ethics is dependent on your belief in God, but I might say that you cannot believe in God and be unethical. But you can be...
Oh, I know many people who believe in God.
Define belief then.
But I think that, no, but I do think they believe in their interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the interesting thing
that's
about...
what belief is.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about religion, and this is a completely different conversation, so we can...
No, it's part of that.
But I think the interesting thing about religion is so much of it is interpreted in our likeness and in our own experience. And so people who would like to leverage, because at the end of the day, it's text, right? It's a storytelling of ethics and morals and values. And you tell that story dependent on what you want to get out of it. And for some, that is economic or political power, social power. And because it's been such an incredible historical tool to gain political, social, and economic power, it has been frequently misused in that way. So I think many people can believe in God and can believe in their God-given right to leverage religion in a particular way.
Oh, that's another story, yes. But I mean, if you believe in the kind, ethical God who...
But to spin it back on you, define God for me.
There you go.
Then why do we have religious wars?
Humans. If you want my opinion,
our via the manipulation and misuse and misinterpretation
our hubris is phenomenal.
But the hubris is the religious wars, not human wars.
No, but I think
they're... provides a convenient justification.
Exactly.
Under the guise of religion.
I think faith is a very effective and very mobilizing justification for almost anything.
If you
both
go
positive
to
and negative. It can be used in both senses.
If you go to Ibn Khaldun, the Arab historian, religion is is the cement that make people come together originally. And that's why
Yeah,
if
and
you
hunt
want...
others
And yes,
as well, not only, but
that's why if you want to have a war, if most of them are under the guise of religion. And this is abuse of religion.
And that is.
And
it
when I
is
say
very
those who
much.
believe in God should, by definition, be ethical, I mean the real belief in God.
But you know what I think is super interesting about this conversation, both the God piece, like we're talking about faith now, we were talking about experience and philosophy and how it shapes our decision making. I think something that we haven't talked about is agency. And I think both of those really drive towards agency. Like, yes, wars are, anchored in interpretation of text, but it's because that text makes people feel empowered. They have a sense of agency in one way or another. That's how you drive people to, I think a huge part of the longevity conversation or life extension conversation is around agency, right? And so I actually think the agency piece when it comes to meaning and to faith and to health span and lifespan is actually a pretty interesting one. And since I have 3 academics, I would like to hear, and scientists, I would like to hear from you all
I'm an academic.
how you think,
I'm not really a scientist.
how you think
did a
agency
scientist
plays a
project.
role in the conversation around life extension and in the conversation around meaning.
We begin
Let's
with
start
the
with Michael,
philosopher.
our philosopher.
Yeah, that we both have
Dump
our-
it on him.
thank you.
I like how both of them were like, we're not taking that question.
Also in context of meaning, you said, yeah?
Yeah, I think for example, one thing that's been coming out recently is some of the studies around AI and the fact that increasingly populations feel like AI is not in service of them, that it's actually moving beyond their capacity and ability. Yeah. And the word agency continues to come up. I have no control, I have no agency. And I'm curious how much of this conversation is anchored, this belief. And maybe it is the perception that when you're younger, you have more agency and capability over your own body, over your own mind, but how much of this is really anchored in the intersection of agency and meaning?
Maybe it's not just agency. Sorry for that.
Yeah,
When I'm a child,
I
it's-
would not use the word agency. I would use autonomy. So there's a certain, we have a certain belief that autonomy is a good thing and always a good thing, right? And of course, we experience many limitations in our lives, mostly through the fact that we have a body, that we are embodied creatures, right? And one of them is that we age and die. So in the spirit of gaining more autonomy, we may want to get rid of aging and death as one, perhaps the most important limitation of our existence. But it seems to me that autonomy is overrated as something that is important for
Says
good
someone
life.
who has it.
What, sorry?
I said, says someone who has it.
Says something who has it to a certain degree, right? But of course, none of us is completely autonomous.
like free will, yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't need to have that conversation in the first place.
So now we're into free will.
So it's maybe relatively autonomous compared to some other people, but it's far from being completely autonomous. My point being that many things in life, many of the good things in life, come to us unbidden and are not things that we have freely chosen. So, and if you want to be completely autonomous, you have to cut yourself loose from everyone, everything else in the world, especially other people, because as long, to the extent that you relate to other people, rely on them, care for them, and so on, you infringe on your own autonomy, right? So you can only become completely autonomous if you live in your own world. But we are, and that's my statement about human nature, we are social beings, right?
But that's why I used agency, not autonomy from the beginning.
Yeah,
My question wasn't about autonomy.
Yeah.
But
My question is about agency.
okay, but what is the difference exactly?
No, agency is the capability and the ability to do. Autonomy is the assumption that it is singular. You're talking. Agency can be communal. Agency
Autonomy
can be
takes
societal.
it right with it.
Exactly.
and
I'm
agency
talking
doesn't.
about agency.
Yeah, that's how I've understood Natasha's
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
Your work really ultimately is about having the agency to decide
Yeah.
like your
Exactly,
longevity.
exactly.
And that's how I perceived your work.
Yeah.
So in that context, that's the definition, the defining
I
difference
didn't use the
between
word autonomy
agency and autonomy.
for a reason.
Okay, but in the context of life extension, doesn't it amount to the same thing? I mean, we're losing agency. When we age and die, we're losing a part of our autonomy, our ability to live according
Control of our body.
to how we want to live.
Right, but
But isn't that the
No,
essence of agency
right,
as well?
but even your own definition now of autonomy, this assumption that we have to divorce ourselves from our broader community is where I think it differs with agency. I think you can still have agency and be part of a community. I think I think
but then the
agency is
agency is
singular.
shared.
exclusive.
Right,
For
and
instance-
exactly. And I don't think agency is an individualistic ambition alone. I think it is community, and I think that's where it comes
So
in. aligned with
planetary
me.
fine.
agency, as
Exactly.
Akil Mbembe would have
So I
it.
meant
I
it
would actually want to
fundamentally different.
support this as a preferred understanding of agency, right? That we live through and with other people, that this is an important dimension of our existence. But we don't necessarily have to understand agency in this way. I would want us to understand in that way, because other people are important for us and make our life richer and better.
And how was your
I'd
question
like to-
related? Sorry,
oh,
go
excuse-
ahead.
I'd like to say something, and tell me if this ties in or if this is the direction you were heading. Agency and artificial intelligence. So we were talking about identity and looking at God and soul and spirit and the Elan Vital. Sorry, Elan Vital and whatnot. But it's about living longer and transforming, if that's part of human nature, to improve our environments, to build fires and go to the moon and teach our children all these beautiful things. So how does AI fit into that when we're looking at that transformative process and looking at the advances in technology and what's right here today and understanding AI? And I think you mentioned something about there being maybe a disparity between how people adapted to AI and how it can be used. I think that's a very important topic, and it ties into aging because it is so immersed, and the future for humanity may be very dependent. Maybe not dependent on, but dependent with, as a more of a collaborative type of cohort to get things done. And it makes me think about, in any type of problem solving, we always used a tool, whether it was the early Chinese, what was that thing where you take the...
Abacus?
Abacus.
Yeah, abacus. Thank you. I love my dictionary over here. Very, very, very cool. So, yeah. And we use stones, count the stones and pebbles and whatever, not sand, but, and maybe in a clock, switching it. We use these tools to tell us about time and numbers to better quantumize and understand. And now we're at the verge of quantum mechanics and quantum computing, et cetera. So in looking at this whole area of where we're headed in a philosophical and a spiritual way that ties in religion and identity, autonomy, and agency, I think we have to include AI in it because it is our brethren, kind of. And many people are very afraid of it.
Moi.
And yes, I can understand. And some are not, moi. And some are looking towards that collaborative union as a very necessary component. Now I'm going to go to biology for just a moment to explain my position on this. When I think about human evolution, and my hero there is Dr. Lynn Margulies, and there's different theories, not so much Richard Dawkins, although I respect that theoretically and philosophically. Very interesting perception on our genes driving us and using us to reproduce. But in looking at our evolution, wherever we come from, whatever your belief is, we did evolve with another life form that doesn't share our human DNA. So we have never been exclusively human. We evolved with an organism called mitochondria. And that mitochondria supports our energy. It's our fuel. It's our ATP. We would not be able to exist without mitochondria. It's our ATP, bottom line. Those of us who work out know what ATP is. But it's our energy source, and it's throughout our body. When I look at where we're headed and all the foibles of the toxicity of the world today and in the unfairness, I'm so tired of the word inequity. And it's overused. It's so woke now. It's lost its meaning, like transhumanism or whatever. It's lost a meaning. But when we look at fairness and doing the right thing, it's just so simple. Just do the right thing, for God's sake, When I look at that, I think about we're at a point where we're a bit lost. There's so much political crap, so much anger, so much identity loss. And so I'm not even going to get into the gender stuff and sex and all that. But there's so much confusion. It's this chaotic thing that's boiling over. And you can understand why people are yelling at each other on airplanes and just going crazy. I mean, it's just horrible. And it's not just in one country. It's in Africa too. It's in South, I mean, I go to South Africa and I go to South America a lot and I travel a lot, but I see it everywhere. There's this angst in the young people and talking about suicide and depression. And it's almost become a Monty Python thing of who has the worst problems. Oh, you didn't have a bed? Well, I didn't have a house. Oh, you didn't have a house? Oh, we didn't have, it's like, who can have a worse story?
Who's more miserable?
Yes, who is more miserable? That has become the norm today in behavior in social media, et cetera. Okay, so this is where I see AI as being a really good mitochondria ATP for us.
No, and thank you.
Both for the positive and one thing I will say, this is just a millennial. I'm like, this is actually, I'm not going to respond.
Coming out.
No, but like, do you remember when they were like mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell?
Yeah.
Whenever anybody says mitochondria, I'm like, yeah, the powerhouse of the cell. That
that's
was my.
cool. I like that.
That's my little.
That's very cool.
No, but thank you for that. Like I had a discussion with a friend of mine about this topic, and he made me remember the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
And how that was a pivotal moment in human history where the way that we organize a society has completely changed it. Communism was born out of the Industrial Revolution. And it gets me thinking, actually, what ideologies are going to be born from the advent of AI, but also the possibility of living longer. That's what really interests me. So if longevity is a really lived reality.
Let's get our problem solved first. And I think that the greatest use for AI right now is for us to be able to use it. I've been training myself. I've become... I understand the foibles, I understand the hallucinations, I understand the LLMs, I understand all of it theoretically. I'm not a computer scientist, but I understand it. The best way to do it is jump in and start using it, tell it correct it when it says something wrong, just like you would do anyone. Tell it not to brag off on you. It will overcompliment. Say, no flattery, please. I just want some facts.
Yeah.
But
get friendly with your AI.
You're straightening the algorithm.
I think there's a broader. I think there's a broader question about AI though that is
it's
similar
going to help us solve some problems that we can't solve. We need.
It definitely
some
will,
bigger
but it will
here.
also increase some of the unfairness that we see.
Well, I don't think so. I really don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's programmed now to have that sway, but I don't think so.
Just to bring it back selfishly to aging, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to actually realize that there's 4 cultures from 4 different continents on this table. And does culture have a role to play in how we perceive aging? Are there different cultural nuances or things that we should take notice of? Because I'm pretty sure that there isn't a uniform experience. There are cultures within my Yemeni, Indonesian, Pakistani experience of how we relate specifically to aging. And I'm sure there's ones in Lebanon and ones in Libya, America, Europe, wherever you were from.
Deutschland,
of course. If that is the case, what is your experience culturally with aging, and how does it differ to other cultures you might come across in the world? Michael.
I don't know. First of all, I was born and raised in Germany, but I've been living in the UK for more than 20 years, so I feel more British than German. But it seems to me that that's why I initially said, there is discrimination against old people. I feel there's a tendency to see old people as having done their bit and now they can go and die in peace or whatever. So there's not much value attached to what old people could bring to society. It's all focused on the young, right? Now, you might say, and that was suggested to me, the wisdom of the old, but the sad fact is that many old people are not wise at all. They're just as stupid as many young people. So old age doesn't necessarily bring wisdom.
That's lovely.
But it does bring experience and the opportunity to learn. Many don't make any use of that opportunity, but at least there is this opportunity that you don't have as a young person, right? But the value of old people for society, which is not commonly acknowledged, seems to me is that they are, as it were, guardians or custodians of the past. So we were talking about memory earlier, right? The memory of a time that was very different. And when you get old, times were very different when you were young, right? When I was young, there was no internet, no personal computers, no mobile phones. My son is 17. He cannot imagine a life without this, right? It's very difficult. So, and why is that important? Well, as we talked about imagination earlier and the ability to imagine different kinds of worlds, right? Such worlds also existed in the past, right? Not just in the future, right? A world that is very different from the world we live in today might have existed yesterday. And that is also not only the good things that might have been better, might also have been worse or might be similar and leading to bad things. George Santayana, famous quote, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So we need to learn from the past in order to avoid mistakes in the future. And there's such a forgetfulness about the past there. That's why I said old people are potentially at least the custodians of that past and can tell us what it was actually like to live, for instance, in a totalitarian regime like the Nazi Deutschland, for instance. And if you know this, if you learn from this, you can see that many of the things that we condemn today or think, oh, that was really horrible, had a very slow start, and then until it gradually developed and then accelerated, and then suddenly we were somewhere where no one ever thought we would end up. And you can find perhaps those traces today in, for instance, the rise of right-wing, right radical ideologies in the West, everywhere in the West. And that is something we could learn from old people if we listen to them, if they themselves were aware enough to be able to do that.
I think that question came more specifically from a place of me trying to reflect on my experience as having heritage in the East, but also ultimately being born and raised in London. I was seeing parallel experiences of how people relate in society to the elderly. I have the cultural experience, which was the elders were very much present in the home and they were formative in decision making and very present and contributing. And then outside of the home, I'm hearing on the news that British society is suffering from the largest number of elderly people in retirement homes who are feeling lonely. It's endemic in society. They've been disenfranchised in mainstream society. And there's this tension that I've always experienced within my youth. And I'm wondering what implications that have for longevity and aging and if there is one at all.
But I don't think when we're talking about elderly, it's not homogeneous, right? Because on one hand, yes, you're facing higher rates of retirement homes and you're facing higher rates of mental health illness across younger generations and older, but they also harbor most of your political and economic power in many countries. And so I think we can't assume that it's all monolithic. The older generation is similarly to the younger generation. There is those who have privilege and are in positions of power, and there are those who aren't. I do love I was born in Canada and raised there until I was 14. But very recently, my grandma, who had spent her whole life in Libya, where I had moved when I was 14, had a stroke. And she is physically unable to move her body, but she's been remembering a lot of her younger years. So we had a chance to sit down with her and record some of her stories.
With consent?
Yes, with consent.
I'm joking.
Okay. But it was really interesting to me because it was an opportunity to learn about her in a different way, where she was in a different headspace. She was more reflective. She had been widowed by the time she was 27. At the time, she had 6 kids. She chose never to remarry in a culture where that's very rare. And is, jokingly, the neighborhood used to call her Thatcher because of just how independent and driven she was. But at the same time, she was illiterate. She married very young. So there was this woman who had all this nuance, and I hadn't gotten to ever hear it from her in that way. So I do think there is a very unique and irreplaceable role, which is the storytelling, which is the carrying of tradition, which is, I think there is something about hearing elder stories and better understanding of what a good ancestor looks like and is that is very unique to that generation. No other generation can actually really own that space. And I do think we actually, we do not give it the weight and value we should. Because that for me it has been a formative experience of my adulthood, has been getting to hear about her own experiences, what made her make those decisions. And I'm very grateful for that. And a lot of that is that richness of experience. And but I do wonder what it would look like if we gave more weight to that as not necessarily as a moral framework, but just as oral histories, as lessons, as ideas, as I think could be very exciting.
What about you, Thalia? Like, I'd love to get a cultural insight. And does Lebanese culture see elderly differently and aging differently from other places you've experienced in the world?
Well, Lebanese culture is now becoming chimeric. So I can't give you a really straight answer, but I can tell you that in general, there is respect for the elderly. So if your elderly parent or grandparent is sick or in need of more attention, it's a big no-no to put them in a house or in a home. That's giving up on them. Okay, and in certain areas, not in the capital, there's the image of the elderly. Everyone goes to him or her for wisdom and for information, although they doesn't mean that they're all wise. But look at wine. The older the wine is, the more expensive it is. Okay. When you buy antiques, they say, "Oh, this is antique. Oh my God, I'm going to pay a lot for it. It's really worth it." Why does this not apply to human beings? I don't get it. Okay, why, to go back to society, do the young generation, even now in Lebanon and in the Arab cultures, do they look at the elderly as a thing? There's this gaze of otherness that reduces them to objects, and they sense that gaze. And when they sense that gaze, they want to recluse. And for why? Again, I go to education, to even stories, books that you read. Advertisement. I recall there was a horrific advertisement in Lebanon, and I wrote about it in a newspaper, and they removed it. It was a bank, and the card that finally mom and dad have a card. They can travel to Canada to visit their son and her husband. Once, yes, hi. The second time, and then the third time, you have the son very happy saying, "Oh no, they changed address." I'm making it very simple. The morale of the story is, oh, who wants the old people? Khalas, change address and don't have them with you. You see, especially around Ramadan time, we have this culture in Lebanon. I don't know if anyone else has it. They have these signs for the homes of the elderly. Dar al-Ajaza. The word ajaza in Arabic means a lot of things, but one of them, ajuz, comes from ajaz. Ajaz means dictionary. Ajaz means that you are incapable of, incapacitated. You cannot. The word itself is othering. Anyway, it's a labeling. Okay, I just want to finish the point. And the ads is always a young man or a young girl behind a man with a cane, okay, or a woman who cannot see sitting like this. But this is not what it means to be old. We are stereotyping aging. So, I think this is one thing. Scars are calligraphies. They tell stories. Okay, wrinkles are actually beautiful. Okay, and unfortunately, there is this love of youth, and I don't know. Everyone wants to be young, to look young,
because of capitalism.
I know.
That's why we define aging negative.
But that's affecting our identity and ourselves. We are being so naive and so gullible and so stupid.
But capitalism teaches us that we only have value as long as we are productive, and I think that's a very important factor in the way that we shift our perception of aging.
Why should I retire? Suppose I reach the age of retirement. And I know people who are very clever, very astute, very intellectual, very active, and who can actually continue to give society just because they reached age X. They are supposed to be retired, tired again, not rewired. Why? And we know about the majority of the illnesses and diseases that happen to people after retirement because they are reduced to passive citizens. It's unfair.
Absolutely. Just just to interject really quickly, I love that you brought up capitalism because that was going to be my next point. And you're talking about the value of the elderly.
Yeah.
Capitalism works on a similar notion that things have inherent value by virtue of their scarcity. When something is rare, it becomes more valuable. So Natasha, I want to throw this to you.
Why? Because I'm American and you think it's a capitalist country?
No. Wait for my question.
Blame
That
again.
was
Funny. I was just waiting for that.
That was so quick. You were so quick on that thing. You're like, is it because I'm American?
I'm actually asking,
American exceptionalism strikes
by
again.
by
Yes,
virtue
really.
of preserving life, are we diminishing its value?
No, not at all. I want to say something about Americans. You didn't include me in that discussion. I'm going to include myself.
Please.
In the country, United States, there is so much effort. It's phenomenal towards the older people, senior citizens. The benefits are phenomenal. The attention paid to them is phenomenal. It's through the government, through our healthcare system, through insurance companies, through corporations. There is the most remarkable campaign over the past, it's been growing over the past 10 years to its really heightened. Now, if you're a senior citizen, you are respected first. And it's amazing. It's amazing and beautiful, and I'm delighted to be part of a country that respects the elderly, the senior citizens that much. It has its downsides, to be sure, but I think the takeaway there, it's the United States somehow woke up and said we've got to respect our older citizens, and it's a sign. It's a good sign, I think. I think a very good sign. Now, what did you ask me?
I asked you after that. Does by virtue of preserving life, does it diminish its value by purely capitalistic terminology?
No. And I think that we need to be aware about capitalism. Capitalism is free market. We like the term capitalism because it's a bad term and we can point a finger. I was sitting having lunch with a friend of mine the other day, and he said, I'm leaving the United States. I'm going to go because I don't like the government. And I go, it's just 4 years. Get over it. We had someone we didn't like last 4 years. It really doesn't change the country. The people are solid. The Americans are good, healthy, wholesome people at their core. They have that American spirit, which I really love. It's the cowboy. But he said, I'm moving to Sweden. It's a socialist. I said, Sweden is not socialist. It's capitalist. What are you talking about? So then we had to go through and do research on it. And I showed him the countries that are capitalists. And he was shocked. And there's 4 countries on this planet the countries that are socialists, the countries that are pure socialists. And most of the countries do have free market. They have exchange rates and barters and supply and demand and an economic system that is not the other, the capitalist horror. So I just wanted to get that out to defend sensibility here. I don't think having more years will make our spirit or soul less worthy. Our God or no God or atheism or whatever value we have over time as humans less worthy, or our ability to be generous, benevolent, altruistic, loving people less. I think, if anything, it would be the opposite. This is just my view from what I see, and I like empirical research very much. I very seldom trust what I read, especially in academic papers, especially The Lancet. I know that you've done research with them, and they have made some foibles. And recently, there was a foible about a very well-known academic at Harvard University whose writings, his research was retracted. So we have to be very careful in what we write, get our citations correct, our bibliographies and references accurate, know our terminology. Thank you for being the dictionaries, encyclopedias here. It's so important. The same thing with the value that we place on life. And it can be monetary value or spirit-based value or philosophical ethical value or bioethics value. It doesn't matter. It's still value, however you want to see it. I think the longer we live, the more humane we will become because we've seen it. That's with the wisdom of living more years, and I think that's something very beautiful. And that's what I think is sacred. And we think about sacred, and sacred is not just religious. Sacred is in medicine. Medicine is sacred when it's doing the right thing, and you know about this. Practicing with the oath and the sensibility to do no harm and to benefit to the best of your ability. So I think that there is value in longer life.
Thank you, Natasha.
Yeah.
You
Even for
rounded that
evil
really
people?
nicely. I'm going to have to sadly tie it up right now. But I'm going to leave you guys with a leading personal question. And hopefully you could share it and get as personal as you'd like. But the question is very simple. If I had a pill and it offered you 200 years of life, would you take it? And I want to start with you, Thalia.
No.
Why not?
Okay, we are selves in relation. Okay, I don't want to live where my loved ones are not with me. Okay, we are a very emotional culture, by the way. I'm weary about the future. I'm weary of machines taking over. I'm weary of greed and power taking over the universe. I'm seeing less humanity. And no, I will not take it.
Thank you. Michael?
I don't know. It would depend on the circumstances. For instance, you said, are others involved too? Is it just me? What about my family? That would affect my decision. I'm curious about the future, wouldn't mind living a little longer, but would I then have to live 200 years? Maybe I wouldn't want that. So will I still have the choice to die earlier if it's not to my taste? So it would
Consequentialism.
depend on all those different questions and the answers to that.
Sure. Alaa?
I think my answer is a bit similar to Michael's. I'm super curious. Would I take it if I still had the abilities I have today? I have a 4 and a 5-year-old. I would be super curious about how they would grow up, and what my grandkids would look like, and who knows if that's promised to me. That being said, just for me, it would be a purely my. I'm Muslim. My own religious belief and my own belief is that our bodies are vessels that we use while we're on earth, and our souls, to your point, continue to exist in a much better place. And so why spend 200 years here when I can exist in a much better place where I hopefully get to see them anyways, whenever they're ready to come? So I would say no, despite the curiosity. So whoever does take it, let me know how it goes.
Finally, Natasha.
I think you think, and you all probably think, I go, oh, yes, give it to me. No, I don't think so. It makes me think of the pill of immortality. And what did they, Gilgamesh, and all these stories, poison. But on the other hand, I kind of like Michael's answer, that it would depend. I don't just do things because it's there, and I was hoping you'd go Matrix on us and say this pill or this one. I want to know what my options are.
Well, what would the other pill be?
No, I would probably take it because I would hope that maybe I could do some good, and that's not selfish. I don't mean it that way at all. I've been alone before. I've been, so I'm not afraid of losing everything. I've lost everything before, so that's okay. I would probably take it to see if I could do some good and explore and see what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you, Natasha.
I'll tell you how your children do.
And on that note, what a beautiful place to arrive to some common ground. I want to thank you all for such a nourishing conversation.
Thank you
It's
for
been a
this.
pleasure to share space with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation and want to see more, subscribe to the Doha Debates YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future episodes.